The country club terrace gleamed under a string of warm, yellow lights. My father, Harold Vance, stood at the microphone, his silver hair immaculate, his smile wide as he surveyed the crowd gathered for his 60th birthday. Beside him stood my stepmother, Patricia, her hand possessively on his arm, and my half-siblings, Lucas and Chloe, beaming in their expensive outfits. I stood near the back, a glass of champagne growing warm in my hand. "I want to thank you all for coming," Harold began, his voice rich with practiced charm. "To celebrate not just another year, but my real family." The crowd murmured, some eyes darting towards me. Patricia's smile sharpened. "Family isn't just about blood," he continued, his gaze sweeping past me as if I were furniture. "It's about loyalty. It's about being present." Lucas snickered. A hot flush crept up my neck. I knew what was coming. I'd known for months. I set my champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray and simply waited, my expression carefully neutral. The crowd's silence grew heavy, expectant. "Which is why," Harold said, his voice taking on a sorrowful tone, "it breaks my heart to formally state, here, among the people who truly matter, that my daughter, Eleanor, is no longer part of this family." A collective gasp rippled through the attendees. Patricia dabbed a fake tear from her eye. I saw my aunt, my father's sister, Margaret, cover her mouth in horror. She has made choices that prioritize her own selfish path over the unity of this household. She has not respected my new wife or her children. Therefore, I am left with no choice. Effective immediately, Eleanor Vance is disowned. The silence was absolute. Every eye was on me, burning with pity, curiosity, or smug satisfaction. Lucas gave me a little smirk and a wave. The pressure was immense, a physical weight designed to crush me. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed it down. This was the scene I had replayed in my head 100 times since I'd found the email on his computer 3 months ago, the one where he detailed this exact plan to Patricia, promising to publicly humiliate me to solidify their family bond. I didn't cry. I didn't storm the stage. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I held it up, and the simple gesture silenced the whispering that had begun. My father squinted, his triumphant expression faltering for a fraction of a second. Patricia's grip on his arm tightened. I walked forward, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble tiles. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stopped at the base of the small stage, close enough to see the beads of sweat suddenly forming on my father's temple. I placed the envelope on the edge of the table beside the microphone stand. "You'll want to open that," I said, my voice calm and clear in the stunned silence. "It's a formal notice from the family office. You see, Dad, you can't actually disown me." I met his eyes. "Because I own 51% of Vance Holdings." I turned and walked back through the crowd, past my slack-jawed aunt, past a furious Patricia, and out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I didn't go home. I went to my office, a small but elegant space I kept in the city. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the dark, looking out at the skyline. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I thought back to the day 6 months prior, the day my world had quietly shifted on its axis. My mother's brother, Uncle Frank, had passed away. He was a brilliant, quiet man who'd built a successful logistics company from nothing. At his funeral, my father had been perfunctory in his condolences, too busy networking with Frank's business associates to offer me any real comfort. After the service, Frank's lawyer, a stern woman named Ms. Delgado, had asked to speak with me privately. I'd assumed it was about a small sentimental bequest. Instead, she revealed the truth. My mother, before she died, had given Frank a significant sum of money from a personal trust her own mother had left her, with explicit instructions. She feared my father's reckless ambition and knew marriage would one day leave me with nothing. Frank had been her trustee. He'd taken that money and, over 15 years, invested it quietly and shrewdly, buying up shares of Vance Holdings on the open market through a series of blind trusts. My father, obsessed with the flashy, public-facing side of his real estate empire, had never noticed the slow, silent accumulation of his own company's stock. He was too busy building mansions and entertaining Patricia to pay attention to the shareholder registry. He underestimated the quiet, methodical nature of Frank's grief-fueled loyalty to my mother. Ms. Delgado slid a single sheet of paper across her mahogany desk. It was a statement of holdings. At the bottom, in stark black and white, was the total percentage of Vance holdings owned by the trusts. 51%. Beneficiary: Eleanor Marie Vance. Your uncle was a very careful man, Ms. Delgado said. He wanted you to have a shield. He said to tell you, let them build the sandcastle. You own the beach. I had stared at the paper, the numbers blurring as my eyes filled with tears for the uncle I'd barely known. For 3 months, I held that secret close. I continued to attend family dinners, where Patricia would make snide comments about my single status and my little office job. Lucas and Chloe would ignore me completely, glued to their phones. My father would treat me with a distracted, condescending affection, occasionally asking if I'd met anyone nice, or if I was still doing that consulting thing. I played my part perfectly. The dutiful, slightly invisible daughter. The one who was too quiet, too agreeable, too easy to push aside. They thought my meekness was weakness. They had no idea it was strategy. I hired my own lawyer, a young, sharp woman recommended by Ms. Delgado. We reviewed every clause of the company's charter, every shareholder agreement. We discovered a poison pill provision that my father himself had insisted on years ago to prevent a hostile takeover. It was designed to protect the founding family. It was poetic. The very mechanism he'd put in place to secure his power was now the lockbox protecting mine. The public humiliation at his birthday party was just the key I needed to turn it. The first consequence was financial, and it was immediate. My father, in his shock, tore open the envelope right there at the party. The notice from the family office wasn't just a declaration, it was an instruction. As the majority shareholder, I was exercising my right to call for an immediate audit of all company expenses, with a special focus on personal disbursements from the corporate account. I knew, from my own quiet research, that Patricia had been using company funds as her personal piggy bank for years. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, a country club membership for Lucas, all billed to Vance Holdings. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was my father. His voice was strained, a far cry from the booming confidence of the night before. Eleanor, we need to talk. This audit, it's a misunderstanding. A formality. We can handle this internally. I listened, not saying a word. Patricia is very upset. She feels you're targeting her. I could picture him in his home office, tie loosened, face pale. I'm not targeting anyone, Dad, I said calmly. I'm protecting my investment. The romantic crack appeared within a week. The audit's preliminary findings were a masterpiece of forensic accounting. My lawyer and the forensic accountant we'd hired presented a clear picture. Patricia had misappropriated over $400,000 in the past 3 years alone. The proof was undeniable. I had copies of invoices for her business development, trips to St. Bart's, receipts for Chloe's corporate event wardrobe. I had it all neatly filed in a binder on my desk. When my father saw the numbers, the reality of his situation must have hit him. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This was about fraud. Misuse of corporate funds was a serious offense, one that could have personal legal consequences for him as the CEO who'd signed off on the expenses. I didn't have to say a word to Patricia. My father did. And from what my sources in the company told me, the screaming match in their pristine kitchen was heard by the entire household staff. The fairy tale was developing cracks. Public image damage was the next domino to fall. My father's world ran on perception. The big deals, the charitable galas, the country club respect, it was all a performance. And now, the lead performer was faltering. Word of the audit leaked, as I knew it would. I didn't leak it. The sheer number of people involved, the family office, the auditors, the lawyers, made it impossible to contain. Whispers started at the clubs. Did you hear about Harold Vance? Something about his wife and the company accounts. His own daughter called for the audit. I received a call from my Aunt Margaret, the moral witness I hadn't known I needed. Eleanor, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. I had no idea he would. I'm so sorry for what he did at that party. And now, is it true? About the money? I confirmed it was. She was quiet for a long moment. Your mother would be so proud of you, she finally whispered. Not for the revenge. For the strength. For not letting him break you. Her words meant more than any corporate victory. The professional fallout was swift and brutal. Two major investors, old friends of my father's, quietly pulled out of a pending joint venture. They cited concerns about corporate governance. A bank that had been about to finalize a crucial line of credit put the application on hold pending further clarification of the company's financial controls. My father's carefully constructed empire was suddenly looking very shaky. The man who had stood on a stage and publicly disowned his daughter for selfishness was now facing the consequences of his own blindness. Lucas was asked to leave his private school. Not officially, of course. But the whispers followed him there, too. The other parents, many of whom were connected to my father's business world, suddenly found their children's schedules too full for playdates with Lucas. Chloe's engagement to a young man from a prominent family was quietly called off. Her fiancé's parents, I heard, had expressed concerns about the family's stability. The social circle my father had so desperately wanted to impress was now closing ranks against him. I watched it all unfold from a distance, never raising my voice, never issuing a public statement. My calm was my greatest weapon. It infuriated them. My father left pleading voicemails that I never returned. Patricia's sister called me, trying to guilt me into being the bigger person. I simply listened and said, I am being the bigger person. I'm the majority shareholder. This is simply business. The irony was exquisite. They had reduced our relationship to a transaction the moment my father chose Patricia. I was just completing the transaction on my own terms. I met with my lawyer weekly. We were preparing for the inevitable legal battle. My father's lawyers sent threatening letters, trying to dispute the ownership structure, claiming the trusts were somehow invalid. But Frank had been meticulous. Every document was notarized, every transfer recorded, every T crossed and I dotted. My father's legal team was trying to fight a ghost, the meticulous ghost of a man they'd all dismissed as a quiet, boring logistics guy. They were losing. Badly. The social distancing became a physical reality. I received an invitation to a charity gala, one of the biggest events of the season. I knew my father and Patricia would be there, clinging to the edges of the social scene they were rapidly being exiled from. I decided to go. I bought a stunning deep green gown, had my hair and makeup done, and walked into that ballroom with my head held high. The effect was immediate. People I'd never met came up to introduce themselves. You must be Eleanor Vance, they'd say, their eyes full of curiosity and respect. I saw them across the room. Patricia was wearing a dress I knew, from my audit files, had been purchased with a company credit card. It was last season's. Her smile was brittle. My father looked older, diminished. People who used to flock to them now nodded politely and then turned away. They stood alone by the bar, two islands in a sea of people who had decided which Vance they preferred to be seen with. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a distant sadness for the man who had chosen this path. The final legal defeat came 6 months after the birthday party. The court upheld the trust structure in its entirety. My ownership of 51% of Vance Holdings was official, undeniable, and legally binding. In the same ruling, the judge ordered Patricia to personally repay the misappropriated funds, plus interest and legal fees, effectively wiping out any personal wealth she'd accumulated during the marriage. The company's board, now keenly aware of where the power lay, formally requested my father's resignation as CEO. They offered him a ceremonial title with no real authority. He refused. He came to see me then, without Patricia. He showed up at my office, looking like a stranger. The confident, commanding man was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and confused. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough. What have you done? I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. What I had to, I replied. You wanted a family built on loyalty, Dad. Well, I was loyal to my mother's memory. I was loyal to the future she wanted for me. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The private regret moment was his, not mine. I saw it flicker in his eyes as he stood there. He wasn't regretting hurting me, not really. He was regretting his own miscalculation. He was realizing that the daughter he dismissed as insignificant had been the one holding all the cards. He was seeing his empire, his reputation, his marriage, all crumbling because he'd chosen public performance over private truth. He'd wanted to impress Patricia and her children, and in doing so, he'd lost everything. He left without another word. I watched him walk to his car, a sleek, expensive machine that was now a symbol of a life he could no longer afford. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound sense of closure. The chapter of my life where I sought his approval, where I ached for his love, was finally, irrevocably closed. The boy who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my school plays, was gone, buried under the weight of his own poor choices. This man was a stranger. I took control of the company. Not in a dramatic, boardroom coup way, but quietly, efficiently. I'd spent years watching, learning, absorbing everything. I knew the business better than my father ever did. I knew which projects were profitable and which were just vanity exercises for Patricia. I streamlined operations, sold off the non-performing assets, and restored the company's reputation with investors. The banks, once hesitant, were now eager to work with the new, stable leadership at Vance Holdings. My first official act as chairwoman was to establish a substantial charitable foundation in my mother's name. It would fund scholarships for young women pursuing degrees in business and finance. It felt right. It turned the tool of my revenge into a source of good. My second act was to offer my father a buyout for his remaining shares at a fair, but not generous, price. It was enough for him to live comfortably, but not lavishly. It was, I thought, more than he deserved. He took the buyout. I heard through my aunt that he and Patricia had moved to a smaller house, a condo in a less desirable part of town. The country club membership was gone. The luxury vacations were a memory. Patricia's designer wardrobe was being sold off piece by piece on consignment. Lucas dropped out of his new, less prestigious school. Chloe's engagement was never revived. Their perfect family, the one my father had publicly chosen over me, was now just a regular, financially strained family dealing with the consequences of their own greed. Aunt Margaret became a regular part of my life again. We had lunch every other week. She would tell me stories about my mother when she was young, stories that filled in the gaps of my memory. She became the family I had been missing. We didn't talk about my father much. When we did, it was with a shared sense of loss for the man he used to be, before ambition and a new wife had twisted him into someone else. Her support was a quiet, steady anchor in my new life. I sold the apartment I'd been renting and bought a place of my own, a bright, airy loft with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the first home that was truly mine, decorated not to impress anyone, but to please myself. I filled it with art I loved, books I wanted to read, and comfortable furniture I could actually relax in. I would wake up on Saturday mornings, make coffee, and just sit by the window, watching the city come to life. The peace I felt was profound. It was the peace of not having to perform, of not having to brace for a casual cruelty. I started traveling, not for business, but for pleasure. I went to places my mother had always wanted to see. The tulip fields in the Netherlands, the ancient ruins in Greece, the lavender fields in Provence. I took her photo with me, a small, framed picture, and I'd place it on the nightstand in every hotel room. I was finally taking the trips we dreamed of when I was a child, before she got sick. I was living for both of us. I ran into Patricia once, about a year after the buyout. It was in a grocery store of all places. She was in the checkout line, looking harried and ordinary in jeans and a simple sweater. No designer labels, no perfect hair. She saw me, and her face went pale, then flushed a deep red. She looked away quickly, pretending to study the magazine rack. I finished my shopping and walked past her. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any insult we could have exchanged. She was just another person in a grocery store, and I was someone who had moved on. The company was thriving. We expanded into new markets, developed a reputation for ethical business practices, and were featured in a major business magazine as a comeback story. The article mentioned my father only in passing, referring to him as the founding CEO who had transitioned to retirement. It focused on me, on my strategic vision, on the quiet competence that had saved the company. My mother's foundation was mentioned prominently.
It was a good story.
It was my story. My father died 5 years after that birthday party. The call came from Aunt Margaret.
A heart attack, she said.
It had been quick. I felt a strange, hollow ache, but not the overwhelming grief I might have once expected. I went to the small, sparsely attended funeral. Patricia was there, looking older and diminished. Lucas and Chloe stood stiffly beside her, not meeting anyone's eyes. A few of my father's old business acquaintances came, but most stayed away. The social circle that had once flocked to him had long since moved on. I stood at the back, wearing a simple black dress. I didn't speak. I didn't approach the family. I just listened to the generic words the minister said about a man he clearly hadn't known. When it was over, I walked to the grave and placed a single white rose on the casket. For the father who taught me to ride a bike. For the man he used to be. Then I turned and walked away, leaving Patricia and her children to their grief and their silence. Aunt Margaret squeezed my hand as we left. That was enough. In the years that followed, I built a life that was full and rich. The company continued to succeed, but it was no longer my entire world. I mentored young professionals, sat on the boards of nonprofits I believed in, and cultivated a close circle of genuine friends. I dated, sometimes seriously, sometimes just for fun, but I was in no rush. I had learned that my completeness didn't depend on another person. I was enough on my own, and that was a powerful and liberating truth. I often thought about Uncle Frank, the quiet man who had changed my life with his foresight and his love. I visited his grave on the anniversary of his death every year, leaving a small stone on the headstone, a Jewish tradition I'd learned about from a colleague.
It felt right.
A small, tangible sign that someone remembered. His gift to me wasn't just money or a company. It was the knowledge that I was seen, that I was loved, and that I had the power to shape my own destiny. The story of my father's public disowning and its aftermath became a kind of legend in certain business circles. People would ask me about it sometimes, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. I never told the whole story. I would just smile and say, my father underestimated the value of preparation. It was a simple, true statement that left them wondering. The mystery only added to the power of the narrative.
It was better that way.
The full truth, the depth of the betrayal, and the meticulous nature of my response was mine alone. I kept the cream-colored envelope on my desk at home, tucked into the frame of my mother's photograph. It was a reminder, not of my father's cruelty, but of my own resilience. It was a symbol of the moment I had refused to be a victim. The moment I had chosen to meet humiliation with quiet, devastating power. It wasn't about hate. It was about self-preservation. It was about honoring the legacy of the two people who had truly loved me, my mother and my uncle. Patricia tried to reach out once, a few years after the funeral. She sent me a long, rambling email, full of excuses and justifications, trying to explain away her behavior. She said she'd been insecure, that she'd felt threatened by my connection to my father, that she'd only wanted to protect her own children. She asked for something.
Forgiveness, maybe.
Or perhaps just an acknowledgement that she was human. I read the email carefully, felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, and then I deleted it. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Her insecurities, her choices, her consequences, they were not my responsibility to manage. My forgiveness wasn't a prize to be won with a well-written email years too late. My peace had been hard-won, and I wasn't about to trade it for a hollow gesture of reconciliation with someone who had never once, in all the years I'd known her, treated me with basic human decency. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, and that's perfectly fine. I thought about my father's final words at his birthday party. Family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty. He had been right in a way, just not in the way he intended. I had been loyal. Loyal to my mother's memory, loyal to the quiet promise I'd made to myself as a heartbroken teenager watching my father remarry a woman who looked at me like I was an inconvenience. I had been loyal to the family I was born into, the one built on love, not the one built on performance and greed. And I had found my own family, too. Not the kind defined by blood or marriage certificates, but the kind defined by choice. Margaret, my close friends, the young women my foundation supported, my colleagues who respected me for who I was, not whose daughter I was. This was the real inheritance, the one that couldn't be taken away or diluted by a stepmother's schemes or a father's blindness. This was the family I had built, stone by stone, from the rubble of the one that had crumbled. On the 10th anniversary of my uncle's death, I made a substantial donation to the Frank Morrison School of Business at my alma mater. It was a way to ensure his name, his quiet, unassuming name, would be associated with integrity and foresight for generations to come. At the dedication ceremony, I gave a short speech. I talked about the importance of mentorship, of quiet loyalty, and of the power of strategic patience. I didn't mention my father.
I didn't need to.
The story was there in the subtext for anyone who knew it. Standing on that small stage, in front of a crowd of faculty, students, and donors, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had taken the wreckage of a public humiliation and built something lasting and meaningful. I had taken my uncle's gift and multiplied it, not just financially, but in impact. The applause was warm, genuine. I smiled. Not the brittle smile of someone performing, but the calm, confident smile of someone who had finally, fully arrived. I live a life now that my 25-year-old self, the one who flinched at every family dinner, couldn't have imagined. It's a life of quiet competence, deep connections, and genuine freedom. The scars from that night at the country club are still there, but they're faded, like old battle wounds that no longer hurt but serve as a reminder of what I survived. I don't think about my father with anger anymore. Mostly, I don't think about him at all. He occupies a small, closed room in the house of my memory. Sometimes, on a quiet evening, I'll look out at the city from my loft windows and think about the chain of events that brought me here. The betrayal, the secret, the strategy, the victory. It wasn't just about winning a corporate battle or punishing my father. It was about proving to myself that I had value, that I had power, that I was not defined by his rejection. The revenge was never the point. It was merely the path I had to walk to find my way back to myself. In the end, the empire I truly saved was my own soul.